I know it's a bit late to talk about this title, but I lose nothing doing it. Maybe no one will see this, or maybe I can pull some people out to this video. After all, not so many people talk about overlooked games. Besides, I've already wasted around 19 hours of my life playing this thing, so I really want to do something. Anyway, El Shaddai is a video game originally released in 2011 for the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Developed by the now extinct studio Ignition Games, this game was praised for its aesthetic, music, characters, and, well, in simple words, this is a cult classic. The director and mastermind of this adventure is Sawaki Takeyasu, a guy that worked for Capcom as character designer in video games like Devil May Cry or Okami. In other circumstances, I wouldn't be talking about this adventure, but since this thing got re-released in recent years, I thought it would be nice to give it a try. Now, what's this game about? El Shaddai is based on the Book of the Watchers, a non-canon biblical text which talks about fallen angels reflecting, Nephilims, lust, and a really pissed off creator who is sending natural disasters to humanity as a response for their actions. This little background is pretty much the basis for the whole game, which modifies some events and characters in order to make a more appealing product.
It's time, Enoch. You ready to leave?
Enoch, the man who was elevated to the heavens, God's chosen one, has been interrupted from writing who knows what by Lucifer. This guy tells Enoch that he needs to descend to Earth and deal with some events that are disturbing God's creation. Enoch's mission is simple yet dangerous. He has to defeat and incarcerate 6 fallen angels for the crime of betraying the Supreme Being, and more than that, defy him. Although dangerous, our blonde protagonist will do whatever it takes to find the traitors, also known as the Grigori. Equipped with a powerful armor and with the help of Lucifer and some archangels disguised as storks, Enoch starts his quest. As you can guess, this is a game with an epic, celestial atmosphere. I mean, we're dealing with angels, fighting with mythological beings, and helping the most famous deity of modern times. However, that is not the only thing that we can notice about El Shaddai. This is also an ominous, mysterious adventure where various theological precepts are distorted, and where not everything is how it looks like. It's a story with a weird pacing and where sometimes you don't know at all what you're witnessing, mostly because the game tries to implement a lot of things in a short amount of time. And it doesn't help that a lot of things that you see appear all of a sudden, or take for granted that you know the lore of this religious setting. A prominent figure, or an event prior to the current adventure are, for example, some of the things that can cause you confusion. So, all the things mentioned before plus a weird way to expose information cause troubles to me. I wouldn't say that this is the worst story out there, but it has its details. Probably my biggest complaint in this regard would be that the endgame doesn't feel like an endgame. As for the characters, well, my thoughts are pretty much the same as in the plot. They are interesting, but that's it. For example, the fallen angels, which are the main attraction in this adventure, seem to be complex, but eventually you discover that that's not the case. Yes, they can talk about free will, morality, and the way they see some emotions like love, but in reality you never see an actual character development, or a revelation, or a change of mind, and in fact, they don't even get new dialogues. You're always hearing the same thing from them. Sometimes you can empathize and understand their situation, but that doesn't make them complex. The only Grigori that seemed to be a bit interesting is barely seen in the game, and that is a shame because it was a wasted chance. In fact, when it comes to characters, this game wasted a really interesting cast and concepts. Not only the antagonists, but also the supporting characters and the protagonist were completely misused. Although you can understand it a bit more of Enoch, because he's just an avatar. Anyway, if it wasn't for their extravagant and colorful designs, I would have forgotten this cast immediately. I mean, it's hard to forget that pretty white armor, or Lucifer's relaxed and dissonant outfit, or those black armors with eyes and little color variations that the Grigori wear. Now, you must be wondering what kind of game El Shaddai is, and to me, this is an action-adventure game divided into missions with a great emphasis on platforming. As you can assume, you will be jumping a lot, exploring, and trying to reach new zones in the level where you could either find enemies or a collectible. Although you have the necessary to explore as much as you want, the truth is that you have to do little to no effort to find what's hidden or to get from point A to point B. Honestly, I rarely find some detours that would provide something rewarding or interesting, and when I thought that I had found something promising, the tough reality hit me with an empty path with nothing but some red orbs. Something that compensates the monotony in the traversal are the visuals. This game doesn't want to trap you in its world with a sophisticated gameplay, but with an impressive atmosphere. Every level is different from the other, but at the same time, all of them share a colorful, psychedelic, and ethereal setting where the boundaries between ordinary things and imagination start to blur. From white, bright mountains covered in a celestial blue haze to futuristic structures with some similarities to the Tron universe. The scenarios with a sacred, mystical vibe that reminds you that you're looking for a divine being, environments that can be bizarre and beautiful at the same time. I don't know what else to say, the creativity is simply amazing, period. Its stunning aspect is not the only thing that keeps you immersed in the adventure. At times, some missions change the traversal. Most of the time this game works as a 3D platformer but can surprise you with some sections of side-scrolling. Sometimes an entire mission is a side-scroller. Unfortunately, the linearity and emptiness still persists in this variation of the game structure, so other than having a refreshing view, there's not a lot more to say. It is clear that the level design is not the best, but for me it wasn't that bad. I would say that one thing that genuinely pissed me off were the perspectives. You have to be really careful, otherwise you will be dying and dying and dying and dying and dying, and I guess you're getting the idea. Maybe I'm being indulgent, but despite the problems I had a great time walking around. I like to think of these missions as pretty interludes until the next big act. I mean, that's how most games work, I guess, but this game takes this more seriously. You are rarely deviated from your main quest. I would even say that you are never deviated. One way to describe El Shaddai's world is like an abstract, overstimulating road trip where you have stops from time to time in the form of a bunch of enemies, not from the Freemen or Red Orbs. So just like on a road trip, try to enjoy the views, the little things that this experience can offer you, and if something goes wrong, try not to lose your mind. We've been talking a lot about the world's structure, but another prominent feature about this game is the combat, which proposes a refreshing and simple hack-and-slash type of combat. In El Shaddai, you don't beat your enemies up by connecting complex, long combos like some people do in Devil May Cry or Bayonetta or whatever. This is an adventure where the basis to kick some asses is the weapon stealing mechanic, a really important concept as you don't have an inventory. If Enoch wants a weapon, he needs to attack his enemies until their guards are broken. When this happens, they will get staggered and you will be able to take their weapons away. Because of this particular idea, early in the adventure, the player will be constantly juggling a small set of both melee and long-range weapons, the Arch, the Gales, and the Veil. The last one is the one I like the most because it has both offensive and defensive properties, or at least are more evident. Now, getting back to the combat talking, your attacks have to take your enemies by surprise if you want to stagger them. Since there is only one attack button, it could look like you just need to press it like crazy, but that will get you nowhere. Maybe you will land some blows over your enemies, but eventually they will block everything. The solution to this problem is pressing the attack button at a certain rhythm. For example, if you press the attack button twice quickly and then wait a little longer for the next pressing, it will end up in something like this. The more you make such movements, the faster you will take them down. This simple formula is the closest thing to create chained attacks. However, as simple as all this sounds, you could feel overwhelmed by the enemy's constant attacks. This is why Enoch was bestowed with another ability, the Overboost. This is basically like the Devil Trigger from Devil May Cry. Your attacks get a boost, and your health bar, your armor in this case, is regenerated. This state is not a one-by-one copy of Dante's state though. It has one minor but original feature. Besides getting buffed, Enoch gets help from Uriel, an angel who will fight side by side with the player while the overboost is active. Just like the regular ones, Uriel's attacks will vary a little depending on how you press the attack button. One more interesting thing about the overboost mode is that it provides special movements based on the weapon you're carrying at the moment, which is a great excuse to switch between weapons constantly. I'd like to say a lot more about this mechanic, but I only just did once, when I was about to finish the adventure. If you guys want the truth, I forgot how to use it. Overall, it's quite easy to get the hang of everything quickly, and honestly, it's really funny the way you're continuously connecting attacks and stealing weapons at the same time. This is what maintains a varied, dynamic, and entertaining environment. It feels like some sort of dance where you can decide when is a good time for other steps, for other pace, and where every movement feels natural and agile. At times, it even feels really cinematic with those close-ups that the game does when you link some movements. All this and the lack of an inventory makes it easy for the player to get engaged with this hectic, chaotic aspect of the adventure. Now, even if I enjoyed getting rid of strange entities with my celestial arsenal, I wouldn't say that this is a perfect system. Just like the level structure per se, the combat is engaging and monotonous at the same time. Throughout the adventure, I learned that sticking to your favorite weapon is a bad idea. And by the endgame, other than getting bored, I felt that the weapon stealing concept is more a need to preserve an interesting combat cycle, mostly because it is the only way that you have to fight. I'd like to emphasize the word need because unlike other similar adventures, in Shaddai you can ignore a weapon or an ability and finish your adventure happily. In this game, dismissing or even exploiting something feels like it's gonna impact your adventure in a negative way. Similarly, since the enemies make use of the same weapons as you, they have really predictable movements, unlike you, a limited moveset, so you can quickly figure out how to defeat them. I admire how interesting and original the options are to defeat your enemies, but it's just a matter of hours to get tired of the same pattern of jumping, evading, and counter-attacking the same enemies with the same 3 weapons. In a game that you can beat in less than 20 hours, that is a problem. All this would seem to be limited to regular enemies, but unfortunately, it also happens during boss fights. One would imagine a bigger level of complexity when facing these major enemies, but nope. The Gregory have more powerful attacks and a slightly different pattern, but that's it. Other than that, they don't represent a real challenge for the player, nor is tested what he has learned so far, mostly because there's not a lot to be tested. All of the boss fights are planned to overwhelm the player with massive attacks and brute force, and that's it. To make it worse, a lot of these boss fights are similar, at least until you reach the second half. It's as if the developers had been slacking off and then one of them suddenly said something like, "Hey, what if we finally do something nice with the bosses, but not that nice?" This new set of bosses use more creative ways to knock the player down, or makes it a bit more difficult for him to find the right moment to attack. But in the end, the pattern will be the same. When it comes to fights, the people involved in this project weren't fully aware of what variety means. And that sucks because they did all the other things right. Well, most of them were right. Another tricky aspect were the parries. I never got the timing to do them. Actually, the few ones I did were accidentally made. But who cares? Why would I parry when you can always rely on the classic double jump to avoid attacks? Nothing made me feel that this was a really cohesive experience, not even during the peaks of the adventure. To a certain degree, your spectrum of possibilities feels mechanical, which in the end makes this game boring. I don't know why the developers decided to do fights like this, but I know that it could ruin the game for exigent players. In simple words, if you want a refined experience, go somewhere else. Here, you will only find an acceptable challenge with some cool ideas. Now, I would like to talk about 2 things that deserve their own section. One is the soundtrack, that is extremely good, and the other is the frame rate. About the music, well, Masato Koda and other guys created several songs that will help you to get into certain vibes. The use of an organ, a choir, and some other peaceful sounds will reinforce the idea that you're witnessing something special. Other songs make use of African beats to create a cheerful atmosphere, and others are perfect for quick sequences where Enoch is having a hard time. In other words, the music covers every aspect of the adventure and does it gracefully. If you don't believe me, it's okay. You can go to Spotify and check it yourself what I'm trying to say. As for the frame rate, well, I played this on Nintendo Switch and I gotta say that it's a really particular problem. There's no part of the game without frame drops, and as you can guess, this also affected my experience with El Shaddai negatively. The visual effects and parties of enemies are the usual culprits of this issue. After all, there are a lot of things happening at the same time. However, that doesn't explain why you have frame drops when you are pausing the game in a calm environment. My conclusion is that the game has a questionable optimization. At least for the TV mode, because in handheld mode, this thing runs perfectly. It is a weird situation that took me a while to discover because I barely use my Switch in handheld mode. Even if there's an alternative to play this game with no problems, I'm disappointed. We all know that Nintendo Switch is not as powerful as a PS5, but I don't think that a 12 years old game is pushing the console to its limits. It's unacceptable the poor performance of this game. One thing that tells me that El Shaddai is a memorable adventure is that, despite all the troubles, I wanted to finish it. Making a game with big ambitions like this one is tough, and when this ambition comes from a small studio, it's tougher. Despite all the obstacles, this game has managed to have a magnetic vibe. The characters, the plot, and the atmosphere play a vital role in getting you immersed in this unique and interesting world. A world that is constantly changing and demonstrating to the player that it's not a thing regularly seen in the industry. However, that is not enough to please people, even more when you have as many cons as pros. Still, I want to praise that it tried to make common things their own, that it tried to be original. So yeah, this thing is not perfect, and unless you are willing to withstand its problems, I wouldn't recommend this to everybody. So in conclusion, El Shaddai Ascension of the Metatron is one of those things that someone who plays video games should try at least once.